The HOA president thought a dusty iron gate couldn't stop her. But the day she marched up my remote ranch road with a clipboard and a smile brittle as glass, she learned that control has borders and mine were welded shut. What began as a petty power play turned into sirens on gravel, patrol lights slicing through cedar dusk, and a paper trail that would snap back like a whip on the very hand that flung it. Before we ride into this mess, tap the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next wild detour into HOA chaos. If you've ever had a neighbor who mistakes your deed for their throne, this one's for you. Settle in, because it's a jaw-dropper from gate to gavel. The ranch was older than the subdivision's first glossy brochure, older than the architectural committee and its tape measures, older than the photo-op gazebo the board liked to decorate for seasonal newsletters. 50 acres of pasture and juniper rolled away from the cul-de-sac's last manicured yard like a quilt someone forgot to iron. The iron gate had been my grandfather's. The fence posts were scarred with weather and time, and the two-track road that wound to my barn kept its own hours, dust at noon, mud at dawn, light like spilled milk at sundown. I knew every hinge creek and rock shelf, every place the deer crossed and the coyotes threaded through the grass. Paperwork said what the ridge already knew. My boundary line was a hard stop for HOA authority, a clean edge in county records inked years before the board drew its first map. The first letter they sent had sunshine in its phrasing, a friendly reminder to maintain visible harmony with community aesthetics. It looked like a birthday invitation, all serif smiles and pastel margins. The next letters were certified, then embossed with a seal as overconfident as the tone. They called my livestock distracting and my barn non-compliant, a word they repeated like prayer beads. I stapled the letters on a nail in the tack room like a calendar of absurdity and returned to chores. Reseeding the north pasture, tightening the hinge on the windmill pump, shoring a storm-leaning corner of the hayshed. The land, not the letters, told me what mattered. The day she appeared in person, she arrived not alone but flanked. 2 board members, phone cameras ready, shoes too clean for my road. She introduced herself with crisp cheer, the kind of cheer that burns your tongue. She said the community was concerned. She said there had been complaints. She said words like ordinance with a savor that made it feel personal. I walked her to the gate, kept my boots on my side of the line, and showed her the deed. The plats, the dates, the signatures. She read, lips moving, as if the ink might rearrange itself to suit her. When it didn't, her smile thinned. Power has an appetite, and mine didn't feed it. She left, but not empty-handed. Her eyes took my barn silhouette with her. The fencing thickness, the solar angle, the way the road threaded through the cottonwoods. Soon the orange paper arrived, stuck to my gate with tape that fought the wind. A notice made for neighborhoods, misdirected like a package with the wrong name. It listed fines like raindrops in a storm. It itemized my sky. It tried to turn my ridge into a line item. County records proved otherwise. The county itself replied, "Put it in writing," and I sent that letter back down the hill like a mirror. But mirrors don't reform. They enrage. She pivoted to audience. The forum posts were little sermons in a font designed to calm. They implored neighbors to consider collective safety, spoke of sightline disruptions, and runoff impacts, the sort of phrases that borrow the weight of science without lifting a single fact. All the while, my ranch went on being a ranch, spring calves bawling for the first time, a red-tailed hawk hunting the long cut behind the hayfield, a stubborn wind that braided dust devils out of nothing. The board's vice president, a man with a perpetually apologetic posture, called once to clarify boundaries, his voice sliding around words it did not trust. I sent him the same packet. He thanked me, cleared his throat, and nothing changed. The first time the deputies rolled in, the lights were polite, as if even the bulbs understood they didn't belong out here. Karen had called them with a list so thorough it sounded rehearsed. Unpermitted outbuilding, hazardous materials, illegal grading. The deputies had the look of men who'd already regretted their afternoon. I showed them the paperwork. I showed them the stamped approvals for the barn's older footprint and the county notes on rural exemptions. They looked at my neatly stacked fuel cans, the MSDS folder in my shop, the wells written into the land like veins. They turned to her, and their faces settled into that expression the land knows well, a kind of unamused patience. The taller deputy said what needed saying and no more, and by the time they left, she had retreated far enough into her car that the glass reflected only sky. From there, the story thickened. The HOA announced an exploratory annexation initiative, a bland string of words that meant, let's draw the line wider because we want to. They crafted mailers, with aerial photos shaded in serene blues and greens, the way cartographers paint oceans to look safe. My acreage sat in the proposed area like a thorn under gauze. They canvassed. They chatted on porches. They used phrases like community continuity and protecting investments, as if the cedar wind on my porch had less value than a cul-de-sac's symmetry. I stayed quiet at first. I replaced a stretch of woven wire along the creek where winter had chewed and spit. I regraded a rutted hump where a storm had poured its temper. I adjusted solar arrays after the equinox because the sun listens to no board. But silence is a vacuum and ambition rushes to fill it. The second time the law came, I wasn't home. The cameras were. The feed caught everything. The HOA president stepping through the cut chain like a general crossing a border, a private security guard at her shoulder with a badge that meant nothing out here, 2 board members carrying a roll of measuring tape as if they might unspool authority from it. They peered into my barn and counted things that weren't theirs, rafters, feed bins, the number of buckets by the wash rack. On the footage, I could see the dust halos floating in my afternoon light, each particle a tiny witness. When I arrived and dialed, the deputies watched the replay with tight jaws. Trespassing is a simple word. It wears no ornate robes. It walks directly across a line and looks at you. Paper got served. Cameras don't argue. They remember. She posted that night about misunderstandings and unfortunate miscommunications. The comments split. A chorus of faithful believers and an undercurrent of skeptics who had watched too many videos online of HOA presidents crowning themselves with paper. Someone asked for the county map. Someone linked it. Someone else posted screenshots of the earlier deputy visit. The thread, like all threads, tangled itself into knots, but within it ran a clean strand, the boundary line that existed before the board did. That strand held. Rumors tried on new costumes, that I was planning a commercial operation, that I was sheltering dangerous wildlife, that my runoff carried toxins. I invited the county environmental officer to walk the creek. We followed the water as it slipped past willow roots and over shale, and he took readings, checked for sheen, asked technical questions only the land can answer. He stamped his report with a date and his name. Online, his name got ignored by those who like stories better than facts, but the county keeps its own counsel, and counsel has weight in rooms where judges sit and wait for nonsense to be presented so they can dismiss it. That dismissal was still months off, though. In the meantime, the HOA called a special meeting about the annexation. The clubhouse wore its most democratic lighting. The president stood at the podium in a blazer that sounded like a promise when it moved. She talked about integrity and safety and the brand of the neighborhood, as if people and land were products to be arranged on a shelf. Behind her, a slideshow painted my ridge as a risk. There was a photo of my hay tarp framed as an eyesore, a shot of a downed cottonwood after a storm, used as an emblem of poor maintenance, a screenshot of my generator called industrial. I watched it later on the recording a neighbor sent me, safe in my tack room with the rain flicking at the roof. The room's laughter was polite at first, then strained. Someone in that meeting stood and asked about the county line. Someone else asked whether annexation could even be forced onto a parcel that predated the association. The president said consulting council, which is the HOA's way of saying we're trying. And they were. Ambition hates the word no so thoroughly that it will find synonyms for years. I posted once. Once was enough. I put the deed online, the survey maps, the letter from the county, the time-stamped deputy report about the trespass. I wrote without heat and let the dates do the work. The post moved through the community like weather, shared, screen-capped, texted into threads where people could say what they wouldn't say into a microphone. A new tenor arrived. Neighbors who'd once only waved now drove out with pies and practical questions about fences. One old-timer told me the president had been a force long before she had a title, that power had simply formalized itself around her like a uniform. In quiet kitchens, reputations turned like soil under a plow. The sheriff's office called again, not to warn me, but to let me know a complaint had been filed against me for harassment. The report was a mosaic of half-truths and mirrors, that I had tailed the president's car, that I had obstructed a public roadway, that I had filmed her home. Cameras again answered. Geography did too. The public roadway she named stopped at the gate she'd cut. The path to her house passed nowhere I had cause to be. The film I had was of my barn, my fence, my afternoon. The complaint died the bureaucratic death it deserved, a blank check returned to sender. Power, cornered, does something desperate. The special vote to annex failed because process, however weaponized, still drinks from the well of law now and then. When that didn't work, she tried to rewrite the story as a ledger. Dues for shared benefits, invoices for road wear, a notion that my truck's tires owed royalties for the asphalt I rarely touched. Small claims court accepted the filing because doors are made to open, but courts accept filings like ponds accept stones. They swallow the splash and then calm. In the courtroom, she read from bylaws with the fervor of scripture, and my attorney read from the record with the calm of geology. The judge looked from one to the other, weighed a binder of aspiration against a folder of deeds, and found gravity irresistible. Dismissal sounds like a door closing softly. It is not theatrical. It is exact. The record became public. Local reporters sniffed around the edges, then found, as reporters do, the hook, an HOA, a remote ranch, a president whose certainty outpaced her jurisdiction. The story wrote itself with the county map as its spine. Cameras rolled down by the clubhouse. Neighbors spoke with faces blurred or not at all, depending on how tightly they held their caution. You could feel the tide turn the way you feel a wind swing 90 degrees. The leaves face different directions. The flag lunges and then settles. The dust goes elsewhere. The next board meeting did not open with a pledge, but with a resignation. The vice president, who had called me with cautious throat clearing, placed his letter on the table and left it there like a simple object made heavy by context. Others followed in quieter ways. A treasurer who did not run again. A committee chair who discovered a long-standing conflict with Tuesday evenings. The president, still the president, remained. Pride is a kind of glue. Out at the ranch, summer blew itself out with the suddenness of a candle pinched. The pastures browned, then silvered. The hayloft emptied at a pace measured by hooves and the turning of pages on the calendar. I replaced the chain at the gate with a heavier length, upgraded the camera resolution, planted a line of hardy windbreak cedars along the western fence where the gusts chewed hardest. A friend from the county extension office helped me seed a pollinator strip by the creek. 26 species of native flowers planned their exit from winter in those seeds, while we drank lukewarm thermos coffee and watched a hawk argue with a raven over airspace. The land does not care for notoriety. It cares for practicalities. The president filed one more thing, a complaint to a state agency about alleged environmental contamination. The inspector came with calm boots and a clipboard that did not pretend to be a scepter. He tested, he noted. He found nothing but the normal chemistry of country water and a small leak from a fuel can that I cleaned while he watched, both of us nodding at the basics: contain, absorb, record. He left satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with standards. That report, too, slid into the archive of facts, a stack that by now could have held down a map in a storm. The board finally called a recall vote. Officially, it was for leadership renewal. Unofficially, it was for peace. Ballots have their own weather. They arrive, they pile on kitchen counters, they get lost beneath catalogs and resurfaced near cereal bowls. They are filled out with coffee breath on a Monday night. They go into envelopes with stamps someone has to find in a drawer that holds batteries and old keys and rubber bands. They leave the subdivision in a bag carried by someone with no stake in anything but their route. They come back as numbers. The president lost by a margin wide enough to be called a view. She posted a farewell that did not say farewell. It said recalibrate, reflect, continue to be engaged. The HOA, suddenly lighter, began to talk about drainage again and cracked sidewalks. The small governance that neighborhoods need when they are not chasing territory. Out here, the cedars took to the windbreak, the pollinator strip flashed its first reckless colors, and the creek, indifferent and faithful, carried gossip of leaves downstream. There was no victory parade. There was a morning with frost on the gate latch and a sunrise along the hill that made metal look gilded. There was the quiet relief of checking cameras and seeing only deer at 2 a.m., raccoons at 3, a neighbor's dog joyfully lost at 7 and found by noon. There was the sound of a hammer on the east fence, and the smell of cut juniper, and the way silence in the country isn't silence at all, but a conversation of distance speaking softly to itself. And there was, most of all, the boundary line. Not just a mark on a plat, but a principle put into practice for months until the practice wore its shape into the town. The board, The people who had watched it all unfold like weather across their screens. If there is a moral in a pasture, it is this: the land forgives many errors, but not confusion about ownership. Authority, when it forgets its edges, finds them again the hard way. I replaced the old iron gate with a new one only after the hinges finally admitted their years. I kept the original posts. The scars mattered. The chain was new, the latch snug, the sign the same as always: no trespassing, printed plain. I no longer stapled letters in the tack room because there were no letters to staple, only receipts for fence staples and a folded newspaper with the recall headline, "Save not as a trophy, but as a practical reminder that paper can cut both ways." The board sent me a certified letter a month later, this time to confirm unambiguously the boundaries of its authority. It was a pleasant read, a technical lullaby, the kind of document that lets sleep in without knocking. I filed it beside the deed. Winter came soft, then hard, as winter does. Calves kicked steam into the air, and the generator thumped to life during a 2-hour outage that bothered the cul-de-sac more than it did the ridge. From the hill in front of the house, I could see the subdivision lights, the ornamental trees wrapped in white, the halos at each porch, the clubhouse glowing like a snow globe. Beyond that was the highway, and beyond that, another town with another board and another person who believed paper could tell land what to do. But in my pocket was a key, and in my hand, a mug of coffee that smelled like cedar smoke, and at my feet, a dog that knew every inch of the 2-track by heart, and at my back, a barn older than any presidency. The camera at the gate blinked a little green dot into the night and found nobody came through unless invited. There would be other seasons with their own paperwork and repairs, but for now the drama had gone out like a wind that forgets its direction and simply stops. And that is how it ended. Not with applause, but with absence. The absence of flashing lights on gravel, the absence of posts accusing a horizon, the absence of a voice that thought a boundary was only a dare. The land was itself again, the way a horse shakes a fly and returns to graze. I could have written a speech about rights and records and resilience, but the creek made a better one. And it spoke in the only language that always wins out here: ongoing, cool, indifferent to everything but gravity. If this saga of boundary lines, paper crowns, and hard-earned peace resonated, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more true HOA chaos told straight. Share this with anyone who's ever had to draw a line and keep it. More stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the next meltdown.